to this webcast today. I'm Pat Soldano, President of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. We're very pleased to have you join us today. On today's call, as you can see on the screen, we have Mark Warren, who is from the Brownstein Law Firm, Michael Hawthorne, who is from Squire Patton Boggs, Russ Sullivan from the Brownstein Law Firm, and Rodney Emery from Squire Patton Boggs. And I'll go through the agenda in a minute. We hope to have Representative Smucker from the 11th District of Pennsylvania on this call. Unfortunately, he was unable to join, but we will have his legislative director, Noel Britton, who will be joining us toward the end of the call. Unfortunately, Frank Luntz was unable to join us for the call today. So as you all noticed, this call is being recorded, and that recording will be sent around to those supporters and members of Family Enterprise USA and Policy and Taxation Group. If you are on this call and you are not a member of Family Enterprise USA or a supporter of Policy and Taxation Group, we request that you do that. You go to our website and you join up as either a member of Family Enterprise USA or a supporter of Policy and Taxation Group. You are not on video or audio, so if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat or the Q&A and we will attempt to monitor them. We got questions from many of you that registered for this call, and I believe that most of them are going to be answered in all the remarks that we get from our speakers today. But once again, please feel free to put them in the chat. So we're going to start off the call with Rodney Emery, who's going to talk to us about the 2024 elections and the legislative impact. And then Mark Warren and Russ Sullivan are going to talk to us about various subjects, TCJA and those tax provisions that are expiring, the House and Senate tax teams that's been established, the possibility of a wealth tax, the estate tax rate reduction bill, and I'm sure other things. Then, as I mentioned, the legislative director for Representative Snyder will come on, Noel Britton, and she will talk to us about the House tax teams. Russ Sullivan is then going to talk to us about the IRS examinations that are going on right now. And then Michael Hawthorne is going to give us a brief update on the Congressional Family Business Caucus. So once again, I want to welcome everyone. And I also want to especially welcome any of you that are part of the 7 trade associations that have joined as members of Family Enterprise USA. And if there are any of you on the call that are part of a trade association and you would like your association to become a trade association member of Family Enterprise USA, please reach out to your association and ask them to contact us. You can look at our website and you can see the benefits you get as a trade association member. Currently, those 7 trade associations we have are the American Trucking Association, Associated Equipment Distributors, Energy Marketers of America, National Funeral Directors Association, Air Conditioning Contractors Association, National Automatic Merchandising Association. And with those 7 organizations, we have 80,000 new members of Family Enterprise USA. So thank you very much to those trade associations and the members of those trade associations as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rodney, who's going to give us the 2024 election update and legislative impact.
Thank you, Pat. It's appreciated. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. As many of you obviously have been paying attention to the national news, the electoral season is upon us, and nothing more can resonate than what has occurred over the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, our nation was faced with an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. It's unfortunate that several people were both killed and injured during that incident. And it's an unfortunate turn of events with regards to the discourse of our country. And we hope moving forward that the discourse around the politics that we're facing in the upcoming election will be done in a peaceful and lawful fashion, and that no more incidences of violence will rear its head. Thankfully, President Trump survived and consequently was able to move forward. With that said, last week, we witnessed the Republican National Convention where President Trump accepted the nomination for president from the Republican Party. In the process, he selected Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate, and the Republican ticket was sent forward after a successful week at the convention. Over that particular weekend, President Joe Biden made the decision to drop out of the race. It was something that was a culmination of internal discussions, both within the House, the Senate, and national Democrats, having concerns that emanated from his past performance at the first presidential debate. He made the decision to step aside and endorse his Vice President Kamala Harris to move forward. Within the last 72 hours, there's been a ton of activity on the Democratic side with regards to coalescing around her nomination moving forward. The Democratic convention is upcoming in the third week of August, but as of today, it appears that the entire party has coalesced around the vice president moving forward. This race offers an interesting contrast. Based on previous polling with regards to citizens on both sides of the aisle, there was some angst with regards to seeing a Biden-Trump rematch. With Biden now stepping aside and Kamala Harris now being the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, it appears now that some voters are getting exactly what they've asked for, which was not the necessary rematch from 2020, but now a contrast and a different option, which Kamala Harris represents. Obviously, at this point in time, depending on where you look in the prism of where things stand, former President Trump is the presumptive favorite. However, the entry into the race by Vice President Harris does offer a contrast, does throw the presidential race into a different direction, and does offer sort of a different direction than what the presumed race was going to be between Biden and Trump. With President Trump, he offers and represents many of the merits that he championed in his first term. The Republican base appears to be very energized and very engaged and supportive of a second Trump administration, where he would champion a number of domestic and international priorities. Vice President Harris is a different sort of candidate from the standpoint of just having recently become the nominee for the party, which will officially occur, as I said, during the Democratic convention. But moving forward, she is now ascending from the #2 spot to the #1 spot. And it will be interesting to see as she pursues her opportunity to win the White House or to maintain the White House in the hands of the Democrats. We're looking at a 100-day race. This is a sprint. This isn't something that we've seen since President Johnson in 1968 stepped aside, not seeking his reelection. Harris moving forward will look to likely try to build a similar coalition, which Biden and previous Democratic President Barack Obama assembled, which was a coalition of progressives and moderates and young and minority voters. So it will be interesting to see how this race translates. Expect a ton of money to be spent, expect strong messaging from both sides with regards to pushing and promoting their priorities, but more importantly, expect a ton of turnout with regards to how this race shapes up. Ultimately, the race will come down to 7 key battleground states: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Those states are pivotal with regards to who will win the Oval Office and who will win the election in November. With regards to how this race impacts the US Congress, it will be seen with regards to which candidate has coattails that will help their down ballot candidates, which will help with regards to attracting new voters, as well as disenfranchised voters. With regards to the Senate, Republicans are likely to take control of the Senate. Democrats came into this election cycle with a 2-seat majority. And with that said, Republicans, having only needed to pick up 2, are now positioned to move forward with regards to a new majority. With West Virginia now pretty much in the Republican column as a pickup, Republicans now have opportunities within Arizona, Nevada, Montana, and potentially Maryland and Ohio to add to their total. Tough races for Democrats to defend in all. However, most predict that the most challenging states for Democrats to defend will be Montana with John Tester and Ohio with Sherrod Brown. So again, as I mentioned before, looking at the Harris-Trump dynamic, it will be key to see how those respective candidates will play and have an influential role with regards to turnout in those respective states. With regards to the House of Representatives, that offers a contrast to the Senate, where Democrats remain poised with a likelihood of potentially picking up the House. There are roughly 18 to 20 seats held by Republican members that Joe Biden won in 2020. Again, turnout, messaging will be a huge factor with regards to how those seats are defended and whether those pickups occur. Redistricting efforts were pursued heavily in the states of New York and California, and there are also new seats in Louisiana and Alabama that materialize in this election cycle. So with regards to how this plays out, with regards to the top of the ticket and the down ballot, will be essential with regards to who takes over the House. But as I stated before, with regards to how this shapes up from the presidential perspective, the Senate is poised to be taken over with a new majority by the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is likely favored to pick up the House with a new majority. Let me also say that there are a number of salient issues that resonate within this year's election. Immigration, inflation, the Dobbs decision, gun control are some issues that may resonate in certain parts of the country where others may not. So what's important to a voter in California may differ for a voter in North Carolina. What may be of importance to a voter in Ohio may not resonate to a voter in Florida. So for both Democrats and Republicans, in essence, they will have the challenge of trying to identify and push and promote issues with candidates that fit their respective constituents. This will cut across for both House members, Senate members who have to run statewide elections, as well as the two national candidates who must be able to identify what issues will resonate not only with their respective base, but that will also resonate with the middle of the country. Independents will play a huge role with regards to which candidate appeals to them from a practicality standpoint, from an ideological standpoint. So I say all this to say the polls are what is the picture of today. It's a snapshot photo. It's not an exact capture of where we are. We have seen how polls play out in the last couple of presidential elections. We've seen how polls have played out in statewide elections. So I would caution to say that there is a great amount of uncertainty as we head into November. I would caution that we could continue to monitor these races, continue to monitor as we move forward. But that is the snapshot of where we are today. Again, the Democratic convention is set and scheduled for August, and then we are essentially roughly a number of months out from November. So you will definitely be inundated with mailers, with commercials, with messaging. There is a debate scheduled for September between the two candidates. It remains to be seen whether that will remain on the calendar. But essentially, we are going to be a country that's going to be on the edge of our seats as we edge closer and closer to the November election date. Pat, that completes my presentation.
Thanks, Rodney. Really appreciate that. It's excellent. And I know that it's something of great interest to everybody on this call. I'm going to ask you one question before I turn it over to Mark and Russ. And that is, do you think that we will know who our president is the day after the election?
I am of the opinion where we should know. Yes, I'm confident we will have an answer. And I'm also remiss to say, Pat, my apologies to you, my colleagues, and to the audience. Vice President Harris also has the responsibility of choosing her running mate, which I also forgot to share, will be relevant with regards to what goes into her decision-making with regards to her running mate. Will she select someone that is a fit from a compatibility standpoint? Will she choose someone that complements or addresses a weakness within her own platform? Or, as some speculate, choose a running mate that will help put one of those several swing states that I highlighted into the column for Democrats. So do I think it's going to be competitive? Do I think it's going to be close? I do, but I have confidence that when we wake up the next morning, we will know who our president will be.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rodney. Appreciate it. So, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you now. And I assume you and Russ are going to cover the topics I mentioned earlier that are on our agenda.
We are, but I'd like to ask Rodney a couple of questions first. May I do so?
Yes,
Sure.
of course.
One is the analysis of how Kamala Harris's potential nomination will impact the House and Senate races. Seems like to me it might affect them differently. I mean, the states where the Democrats are struggling and have close calls tend to be more rural states, tend to be more Republican leaning. So there, since she is more progressive and from California, might she actually be less helpful than Joe Biden would have been? And then conversely, in the House of Representatives, might she drive really high turnout of Democrats in California, more than Biden would, which could help the 5 or 6 seats where Democrats are plausibly challenging a Republican seat to help, as you said earlier, maybe flip the House to be Democrat controlled, even if Trump wins nationally. Might she be really influential in the areas that help Democrats take the House?
Those are good questions, Russ, and I appreciate you asking such tricky, challenging questions for that analysis. Thank you. No, I would assert, if you recall, when the senator, then Senator Harris ran for president, one of the challenges that she was faced with because of her prosecutorial background, she was pretty much viewed as too moderate for progressives. And that was a challenge that she had with regards to her candidacy at the national level. When she became vice president, obviously, she was assigned immigration and some other domestic portfolio issues by President Biden. I would assert that in the areas where Biden polled well, did well with his polling, those numbers will maintain. I think the calculus was that with Harris, in those areas where he was polling poorly, and I'll use a perfect example of a constituency, is the African American community. When you look at Biden's performance in 2020, the states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, those all were a reflection point of strong African American turnout in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Atlanta, Georgia. So I would assert, I think the calculus was, can she reach traditional constituencies such as African Americans where Biden's support was beginning to become soft? Does it now appeal, because she is perceived as the younger candidate, does she appeal to younger voters? And does she appeal to constituencies that may have sort of wandered off or may have become lukewarm? I think that's the calculus. I would assert that where Biden was strong and where his numbers were solid will be maintained. I think they're gambling on thinking that the vice president now puts them in play with some other constituencies, quite frankly, Russ, that are needed in order to have the necessary coalition to get the Democrats across the finish line.
Good. And one final question. The names that have been batted about in Washington, D.C. for vice presidential candidates are Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky. Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan has also been mentioned, but I think she's taken herself out.
That is correct.
But those candidates all seem to be substantially more moderate than Kamala Harris, at least from what I've read about all of them. What do you think? Do you think that means that she's potentially trying to reach out to win in one of those states, or at least reach out to moderate Americans to try to get them to vote for her, or what?
My read on that, Russ, is she's trying to do both. I think she may look to a Shapiro or, to, as you mentioned, a Kelly or a Cooper that represent one of those important swing states. But two, as you mentioned, in that contrast, her running mates would probably be to her right. They would probably be viewed as the more moderate, as the more balanced, but also you mentioned candidates that have with the exception of Kelly, who's got a stellar background, for those who haven't had a chance to review his background, are executives of their respective states. So I think she's bringing in or looking at candidates who bring some skills to the table that she does not possess. But however, to your point, I do think there's a slight pivot to where she would be seen as someone appealing to progressives and to the left wing of the party. It's the reality that she has to deal with. Same as with Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance. They have to appeal, obviously, to their base, but they also have to appeal to independents and to moderates in this country. So I think the party, the platform that can do the best of threading that needle, maintain the base, while also appealing to the middle, in my humble opinion, will be the winning formula in November.
Okay, so Mark, let's talk about the legislation. We know that politics are absolutely going to play into that, but give us your view of what's happening.
Thank you, Pat. I think what Russ and I would like to do is we'll start with some of the expiring provisions. I'm going to throw up a slide that we can use okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, good. We can use this slide to kind of talk about the main provisions in the tax law that are going to expire next year. Russ will add a couple more, but these are the main ones that come from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was enacted in 2017. That act ended up having very significant business international reforms that were on the permanent side, as well as a handful of business, but mostly individual provisions that expire at the end of next year. And as you can see on the left-hand side, the individual provisions are pretty pervasive. The tax rates and the tax brackets affect really every individual, from the lowest tax bracket and the 10% rate all the way up to the top bracket of 37%. If those expire, all of those brackets shrink, all of the rates go up, and that means that higher rates are going to apply to more income for every American. We're also going to see potentially itemized deductions coming back. They were scaled way back in 2017 and replaced with a much larger standard deduction. So they would kind of reverse places. The standard deduction would get smaller, itemized deductions would come back. We'd also see an expiration of the child tax credit, which was expanded. I mean, there still would be a child tax credit, but it would be half of what it is today at $2,000. For a lot of family business owners that are especially in high tax states like New York and California, Illinois, the state and local tax deduction, one of the itemized deductions, was limited to $10,000 in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That limitation will go away, so all of the SALT deduction will be back, but the alternative minimum tax for individuals also comes back. And as many of you may remember, if you're in that band, let's call it somewhere in the kind of the $200,000 to $400,000 range, if you're affected by the AMT, you lose your SALT deduction. So that was always the law, and I think that was a misunderstanding for a lot of folks in terms of what the implications of the SALT limitation was, is that a big chunk of Americans and family business owners that were in that 200 to 400 range under the old AMT never got their full SALT deduction. And lastly, and really importantly, the estate tax exemption was doubled in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's around $12 million right now per individual. That amount will revert back to half its amount, but it continued to inflation adjust. So if it does expire at the end of next year, we're probably looking at around $7 million a person, with full portability for a spouse that dies and doesn't use all of their exemption. That would really mean a full kind of around $14–15 million for a couple. That's going to be really important because in the debate next year, well, I think we're going to revisit a lot of the themes on estate tax that were discussed in 2017. Already, Chairman Jason Smith, who'd been the previous sponsor in the Ways and Means Committee of the full repeal legislation, he's handed that off to Representative Randy Feenstra of Iowa, and so he's introduced that bill. Similarly, a proposal that the Policy and Taxation Group has advocated for some time, the estate tax rate reduction bill. Representative Jody Arrington from Texas has introduced. That would bring the estate tax rate down from its current 40% to 20%, and basically treat a taxable estate at least the same rate as the capital gains rate. So all of those proposals are going to be part of the mix. I think the real challenge here is that these individual provisions, including the estate tax exemption, and then the 4 business provisions that over on the right-hand side, the recent estimates as to what it would cost to extend those or make them permanent is about $4.5 trillion. And so trying for members, especially with the national debt having gotten significantly larger and the budget deficit now approaching $2 trillion per year, there's a lot more concern on both sides of the aisle in Congress about extending tax policy in a way that is going to require significant amounts to be deficit financed. So I think the debate next year is going to focus very heavily on revenue raisers, but also potentially looking at how do we take some of these provisions and maybe not extend them to the same level. And I think the estate tax exemption amount is one of those where, hopefully we'll see the doubled amount extended, but it's a dial. So if they are trying to figure out ways to cut costs, that may be one place. We could have a repeat of what we had in 2010, 2012, when the Bush tax cuts expired, and the top individual rate could end up going back up. And in this case, it would go back up to 39.6, like it did in 2010 or 2012. And maybe the lower rates are extended, but the top bracket or 2, as was the past case, they are extended at the higher levels. All of those have very significant implications for family business owners, and it's going to be something that we're going to end up having to deal with and continue to educate members on what that impact looks like for family businesses going into next year. And Russ, I know you wanted to mention a couple of other provisions that are going to expire as well.
I do, but I want to ask you a question first. You were there on Capitol Hill as this bill was drafted and
Yep.
right in the middle of it in the Senate Finance Committee. Yeah, help us with a little perspective here as to the relative size of the tax cuts in the individual provision versus the business provision. I mean, there are both tax cuts and tax increases in this individual side over here, but I'm guessing that the tax rates and the brackets are by far the most significant tax cuts. In other words, of the $8 trillion you mentioned that it would cost to extend all these tax cuts with the 3 whatever trillion and raisers that then nets out to the 4.6 trillion. Just give us a rough gauge of where's the big money here. Is it in that tax rates and the bracket?
Absolutely. Yeah. The bulk of it is in the tax rates and brackets. There, as you mentioned, that the top line number you'll hear about is the $4.6 trillion, but that is a net figure. The total cost of all of the tax cuts or benefits, so the lower rates, the increased standard deduction, the expanded child tax credit, all of those benefits cost $8 trillion. Built into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were in this case now, $3.4 trillion worth of tax increases. That's the SALT limitation. That is the limit on itemized deductions, and there are a few others. But you're right, Russ. The bulk of this is on the individual tax rates and brackets. On the business side, the 199A 20% deduction is also a pretty significant cost. It's around $450 billion for the 10-year period. The other three business provisions, the R&D expensing, a tighter limitation on business interest deductibility and bonus depreciation, they already, the first two already started to expire at the end of 2021. Bonus depreciation is stepping down by 20% each year, so it technically goes away in 2026. It'll be 20% next year. They're not insignificant in cost, but everything is going to be fighting for real estate here, to try to get onto the table for members, and with very limited appetite for deficit financing and very few options for revenue raisers this size.
Okay, and Mark, most of our family-owned businesses are structured as pass-throughs, not all of them, but a majority.
Yep.
Which of these business provisions are either exclusively for pass-throughs or would apply to pass-throughs, and which ones also apply to corporations?
Yep. The first one on the right, the 20% 199A deduction, is exclusively for pass-through businesses. The other
that's
three,
about 30 million taxpayers. How many claim it?
I don't have a good number on that, but it's a
I think
lot.
it's around 30 million.
Okay. It is.
We all know that 80% of family businesses are pass-throughs, so it affects 80% of family businesses in America.
Yeah, very significant. And it coordinates with the top, with all of the individual tax rates, and really is designed to try and provide some equivalence between the taxation of pass-through business income and the corporate income, which is taxed at 21%. But then if the corporation makes a dividend, the shareholder would pay capital gains or dividend taxes on the receipt of that dividend. So that one is not only very significant for family business owners, but it is exclusively for pass-throughs. The R&D, business interest limitation, and bonus depreciation apply regardless of the way that a business is set up.
Okay.
And I would just tell everyone on this call that if you're confused as to what is a pass-through, if you go on our YouTube channel, Family Enterprise USA YouTube channel, you will see a 2.5-minute graphic that explains what a pass-through is. And we've gotten a lot of hits on it because I think a lot of people are interested in it. It's a confusing concept.
All right, I would, as a Democrat, let me add at least one major provision. The Democrats did include an extension of the Affordable Care Act premium tax credit. That's a tax credit for individuals who buy their insurance through the exchange, not from their employer, but instead through the state-based exchanges. They expanded that so that the credit was higher, and that expansion lasts until the end of 2025. I think Democrats designed it so it would expire at the same time that there would be debates on these other issues. That one cost several $100 billion as well to extend. Maybe not quite as expensive as the 20% deduction for pass-throughs. There are also a few energy-related provisions from the IRA that either expire at the end of 24 or a year later. So those might be on the table as well.
So Russ, let me ask you, going kind of back to what Rodney was talking about in terms of the current political landscape and all of the changes. How do you think next year plays out in this tax debate with a potential, President Harris now? Do you think she adheres to a lot of where Joe Biden has gone with his agenda over the last couple of years, and do we have any information on kind of what her kind of more personal preferences are in the tax space?
Yeah, well, as Rodney mentioned earlier, a vice president is going to be loyal to the president that she or he serves, and so she has supported the Joe Biden agenda, which is for a significant number of tax increases on successful individuals and multinational businesses. But Kamala Harris ran for president in 2020, and there she did put out a number of proposals in the tax arena that the media has not really talked much about. But I'm predicting she's going to have to face a lot of hard questions from the media, and then if she gets the nomination, certainly is going to be criticized by Republicans. Let me outline 4 of those real quickly. One is on the corporate rate. She is for raising the rate to 35%, and she was for raising it even back in 2020. So even when TCJA was existing, she wanted to cut off that lower 21% early. She wanted it to go back up to 35% as soon as possible. That's much higher than Joe Biden's 28% and reflects her views of being more progressive on taxation of businesses. With respect to TCJA, she had called for repeal of the TCJA, except for individuals who made and taxpayers who made under $100,000 in income. This contrasts with Joe Biden's cutoff, where he most of the time said he's for extending TCJA for everyone under $400,000, because he took a position that he would not raise taxes on individuals and families who made under 400,000. So obviously, going down to 100,000 captures a lot more people who would see their taxes increase. Third, she had a healthcare proposal called Medicare for All, and she paid for it in part by imposing a new 4% tax, premium tax, on households and taxpayers making more than $100,000. So in essence, she was for a 4% rate increase in the Medicare tax. So that means that's a payroll tax. But so if you say she's for 39.6, she's certainly at least for 43.6, at least for individuals, taxpayers making more than $100,000. And then finally, and relevant to family-owned businesses, she was for increasing the estate tax, although she did not prescribe the details. She had a proposal to raise teacher salaries significantly, and she said that was going to cost $315 billion, and she was going to pay for it fully by closing so-called loopholes or otherwise increasing the estate tax so that it would raise $315 billion over 10 years. Well, that's a significant increase in the estate tax. Hard to compare that to Joe Biden's, because Joe Biden was for imposing capital gains at death, and at that point, collecting capital gains tax and the estate tax on the same assets, that as well as going back to a 7 million exemption. Kamala Harris has not really been more specific on that, but suffice to say, I think she wants a bigger estate tax than Joe Biden did even.
And Russ, I think if we look over quickly on the Republican side now, with Senator Vance, J.D. Vance being the Republican VP nominee, he's pretty new to the Senate first term. We don't have a lot of a past history on where he stands on tax issues. He has focused in the Senate on a couple of areas that I'll flag. One is, in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there was a excise tax of 1.4% created to apply to university endowments, very, very large endowments. And one proposal that he has introduced would increase that 1.4% to 35%. So maybe he and Vice President Harris have something in common on a 35% rate applying to something. And then another area that he kind of unusually has aligned with very progressive Democrat Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is to limit tax-free reorganizations in the corporate community only to kind of smaller companies or transactions. Mergers involving companies that of assets of under $500 million. So that one's a little bit of a head scratcher. But as Russ, as you pointed out, typically the vice president follows the lead of the president, and I think we all have a pretty good sense from the first Trump administration that if he wins, he'll have some pretty strongly held views. We've already heard indications about cutting taxes on tip income, and also going back to all of these expiring provisions, trying to look to tariffs in some respect, global tariffs or targeted tariffs specifically on China, to raise some revenue, significant revenue, to offset those changes. So
has J.D. Vance said anything about a wealth tax of any sort? I mean, he is a populist in some ways, and certainly has said some things, as you mentioned, sort of anti-big corporation. But how about on the individual side?
I have not heard him talk on a wealth tax. That isn't a particularly popular concept among Republicans at all. So it's not surprising. I know that there are some Democrats, especially in the Senate, who have taken that on.
So to that point, Mark and Russ, you all know that wealth tax is of huge concern now to family businesses, significantly more than last year. So give us an update on where you think that sits, as compared to just 12 months ago, and what the possibility could be of a wealth tax.
Well, most of the action, Pat, has been on the Democratic side, and it's been centered in the Senate, although there's some House Democrats who have pushed it as well. But the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Budget Committee both have pushed it. Ron Wyden, chair of the Finance Committee, has put out a plan that would tax unrealized gains through a mark-to-market regime that would say you would take your assets at the end of the year, and if they are more valuable than they were at the end of the previous year, you have an appreciation, you have value increase. He believes that's income that should be taxed at that time. He does give an exception if it's illiquid, that you can pay the tax later, but at that point you have to pay interest on the tax. So you have to pay it as if it's owed year to year. He's now up to 18 co-sponsors of that. I will say Vice President Harris has not specifically embraced that proposal. Neither did Joe Biden, although they talked around it and certainly have been in saying that individuals who are successful and the wealthiest Americans need to pay more in tax. But based on her other proposals for increasing the rates for everyone that's above $100,000 and her estate tax proposal and wanting to repeal most of TCJA, certainly I think she's going to be open to some sort of idea on that, and we may see that come out in the campaign. She did not go as far as say Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, senators who proposed a specific 4%, 2%, some amount of wealth tax per year. But
and Russ,
it's going to be a debate in the campaign.
All of those proposals came out before the Supreme Court's recent decision in Moore versus United States, which wasn't directly on a wealth tax, but it did give an opportunity, at least for 4 of the more conservative justices, to put out opinions that seemed to pretty strongly suggest that there could be constitutional imperfections or questions about a tax on unrealized gains. Do you think that that's something that like the proponents in the Senate are thinking about, and you think that will slow them down or make them think otherwise about a wealth tax that has a mark-to-market kind of regime?
Well, the answer is sort of yes, it should, but no, it doesn't appear to be. I mean, Senator Wyden came out with a statement right after that case was decided saying, he believes his proposal is past constitutional muster. And so he sort of, embraced the result of the Moore case. I do think that, as you mentioned, if the Supreme Court doesn't change in terms of its membership, that a proposal like Senator Sanders or Senator Warren's would be highly susceptible. It would be the item that is most likely to be challenged effectively under Supreme Court precedent. That doesn't mean I don't think Senator Wyden's or others' proposals that aim at unrealized gains would not be challenged as well. They might have a little more leg to stand on than some of the others, but there's some pretty clear language by some of them that they really think that gains need to be realized before they're taxed. We'll just see those couple of justices who indicated they like that position generally, but didn't want to apply it here in the Moore case, how they come out.
So Russ and Mark, I see that Noelle Britton, who is the legislative director, is on the phone with us today. So let's turn it over to her so she can talk to us a little bit about maybe the House tax teams and what else she would like to talk about in terms of family businesses.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. As she mentioned, I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Smucker from Pennsylvania, and am helping the Congressman lead up his efforts as the chair of the Main Street tax team. I'm sure you've covered this already. I know he actually had the pleasure of joining the Family Business Caucus when some of you were in DC a couple of months ago. So I know he really enjoyed speaking with you. He himself has a family business background. So he, understands where a lot of you are coming from. But so I'm sure you've covered that the Ways and Means Committee has established 10 different tax teams, each tasked with focusing on different parts of the code. Our team is the Main Street tax team. The biggest area of focus for us is finding a way to extend or make permanent Section 199A, the small business pass-through deduction. I'm sure many of you are all pass-through entities. Like I mentioned, the Congressman has a background owning several pass-through businesses. And we see this provision, it's slated to expire at the end of next year. We think it's one of the most critical ones for tax reform. If this were to go away, the 20% deduction on qualified business income, then some pass-throughs would be facing a tax rate of the federal level alone over 43%. And we think that would just be completely, damaging to the economy, for jobs, for, our communities. So our team is hosting several events between now and really the end of September is what we've got scheduled through. This morning, we actually had a roundtable with members of the Joint Committee on Taxation. That was really just to go into the nitty gritty details with our members on Section 199A and also the scoring provisions. It's one of the challenges we face. I can kind of get to what we're up against in a few minutes. But so really making sure our members are familiar with the ins and outs of that. Next week, we have a field event that we will be hosting in our district up in Pennsylvania. It will take place on Thursday afternoon. It was supposed to be a flyout day, but now session has been canceled next week, but we're still moving forward. And during that, we're actually going to be doing a walking tour through one of the communities in our district. It's called Shrewsbury. And then we'll be hosting a roundtable with many family-owned businesses. Actually, every business that's participating is pass-through, and everyone will be talking about how 199A has helped them, what would happen if their tax rate were to snap up to, over 40, for some, depending on what states they're in, it could be a 50% tax rate. What would happen? Will they have to, how they'll make changes in their business to prepare for that, and how detrimental it would be. So really trying to help us build the case for why we can't let this expire. Following that, we will be having an additional roundtable in September with some more stakeholders on 199A. This will be in DC. And then we'll be having 2 other roundtables. This is the other piece to our team that falls under our scope, is access to capital for small businesses and startups. So we'll be having 2 roundtable discussions with various stakeholders across the capital landscape in September. Some of that will center on, I know, issues that are important for the Family Enterprise Institute, one being business succession. When you think through, how are you going to pass this along to the next generation? Some of the various parts of the code that can really impact the decision-making process are some of the things that we'll be talking about. Before I close, and I'm happy to, answer any questions if anyone here on the panel has them, but some of the things we're up against for next year, and again, you may have covered this already. First and foremost, this provision is very costly to extend. The score that JCT has provided, and this is maybe not the most, the best score, but basically the score they've given us, they have to say it's an isolation of assuming no other provisions got extended. So we know other things probably will in tandem, but if you were to just take 199A, it's about $700 billion over 10 years is the cost. So we're trying to, figure out ways that we can appropriately offset that or make sure that, we're factoring in all of the macroeconomic impacts of, what would happen. I think this is a really good growth provision as well. So it's good for our economy if we keep it. We've just got to show why that's worth the investment. The other challenge we run into is there are some individuals, mostly on the Democrat side, who believe that all businesses should just be organized as a C Corp. It's a tax simplification strategy for them. And that's where we're really counting on, folks like yourselves who can explain the many reasons why you may want to be organized as a pass-through entity and the benefits for that. So we're trying to build anecdotes, stories. I encourage everyone to submit them. The Ways and Means Committee has started a portal on the website. If you go on to waysandmeans.house.gov, you'll see a section called tax teams, and there's an email address there that you could submit your story, share what would happen with your business, share why you're organized this way and why it makes sense for you. And then the last piece we face is there are some Democrats, I believe Senator Wyden has had a proposal in the past to cut off the eligibility for the deduction at those with revenue of $400,000 or less. That would be pretty detrimental as well, we think, for the broader economy if we all of a sudden took away the parity that was provided by way of TCJA with the 21% corporate rate by allowing pass-throughs to kind of get their rate a bit closer to that as well. So that's kind of the, we're doing the work now to hear from businesses who would fall into that category where they're not large pass-throughs, but they're also, they'd have income higher than that $400,000 range, and really try to drive home the story on how that could cost a lot of jobs in Main Street America. So that's what we're doing with our tax team, and we appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today.
Well, we really appreciate the work that you're doing. Representative Smucker, as you said, came to the last Congressional Family Business Caucus meeting. He was awesome. We know you work with the High Center in Pennsylvania. We're huge supporters and sponsors of that center. And so what my question to you would be, these roundtable discussions are amazing. Is it only open to family businesses in his district? Is it open to other family businesses? Because we have a lot of family businesses that want to get their story out. And based on the work that we've done with all of our surveys, we've learned that 80% of family businesses are pass-through entities. So 199A, to your point, is critically important, and we want to help you in your efforts. So how can we do that?
Thank you. Yes. So for the roundtable next week, it is just businesses in our district. But like I said, we have several that are family owned who are already slated to participate. And I would say the best way for the organization to contribute is submit your information to our portal. If you want to do that through Family Enterprise USA, like a big letter, or if you want to encourage your individual members to also share their stories. The way I see this is Chairman Smith has tasked us with building the story and being able to, lay the ground and the foundation to make the case next year and argue why we need to extend this and extend it at the, parameters that the deduction already exists, not cutting things off or taking it away from folks. So the more you're able to share exactly how this would impact your unique businesses, I think you'll see some of that next year referenced when we go to markup or, materials as we try to build our case with the broader conference.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope everyone on this call will go to that portal as Noelle suggested, and please share the details of your story. So thank you, Noelle. We really appreciate you being on this call with us today and all the work you're doing to help family businesses.
Thank you.
Thanks, Noelle.
So now in the literally few minutes that we have left, I'd like Michael Hawthorne to give us a quick update on the Congressional Family Business Caucus.
Thanks, Pat. I'll be brief. We're pleased to announce that as of today, the Congressional Family Business Caucus has grown to 49 members in the House. That's an increase of 7 members since our last supporters call in April when I last gave an update. And that's thanks to the outreach and support of FUSA and Policy and Taxation Group members across the country, including many of you on the call. Recent additions to the caucus include members of Congress from Colorado, Michigan, New York, and North and South Carolina. And we also now have a caucus that's nearly evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. Today, we have 28 Republican members and 21 Democratic members of the caucus. For those of you who are new or prospective members in the call, just for a little bit of background, the Congressional Family Business Caucus is a bipartisan educational caucus intended to bring awareness to the issues facing family businesses across the country to members of Congress. We have 4 co-chairs in the House: Jody Arrington of Texas, Brad Schneider of Illinois, Claudia Tenney of New York, and Henry Cuellar of Texas. And the caucus includes members from various backgrounds, including family business owners themselves, and also members of Congress who are just interested in learning more about your stories and the issues, economic issues facing family-owned businesses. Lastly, I know we're close to time. I'll just flag that this September, FUSA will host its next event in coordination with the caucus on Capitol Hill. It will be on enterprise structure. The event will bring family-owned businesses from across the country to DC to meet with their members of Congress and to present in our roundtable discussion. We hope to see many of you participate there, and we hope to have you join us for meetings with your members of Congress and congressional staff. And we also hope the caucus will be 50 members strong by our September event. So one more member to go. I know many of you have contributed to our call to action and are contacting your members, and we appreciate your outreach and support. So thank you, and Pat, back to you.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. We are very excited. I know we'll be over by the time we have our annual meeting. And I hope any of you that are interested in attending the caucus can please reach out to John Marino or John Gugliano. We'd love to have you there. We really need your stories. As you heard from Noelle, this is a really critical time, and 199A is a really, really important issue as other issues that family businesses are facing. So thank you all for being on the call. Thank you, speakers. I think it was an excellent and very informative call today. So once again, thank you, speakers, and thank you everyone else. And I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.